What if the scariest thing in your life wasn't what someone might do to you, but what you might do if you lost control? What if your anger felt dangerous? What if your sadness felt radioactive? What if your fear didn't just stay in your chest like a normal, inconvenient human emotion, but it threatened to spill out into the world and become something monstrous? Because for Rachel Roth, or Raven of DC Comics and Teen Titans fame, that's not just a metaphor. That's a Tuesday. Welcome back, fellow mages, to the Grounded Mage, where we explore how myth and magic exist in everyday life. Today, we are going full empath goth. She's not just moody, she's not just mysterious, she's not just the patron saint of every emotionally repressed gifted kid who wore black and said, "I'm fine," while spiritually disintegrating. Raven is one of the best depictions in pulp culture of emotional suppression, trauma management, hypervigilance, identity fear, and the exhausting labor of staying in control when you've inherited chaos. Today, fellow mages, we are going to dive into Raven, her backstory, her psychology, and why her struggle with darkness, power, and selfhood might hit close to home. Because sometimes the battle isn't defeating the demon. Sometimes it's learning that you are not the same thing as what made you. So let's get into it. Let's start with the basics. Rachel Roth, better known as Raven, is one of DC's most iconic magical characters and a core member of the Teen Titans. Now, depending which version you grew up with, the 2003 animated series, Teen Titans Go, or various animated movies, she shifts a bit in tone. Sometimes she's solemn and mystical, sometimes she's dryly hilarious, sometimes she's a deeply wounded teleempath trying not to implode. And sometimes she's all of those things all at once, because apparently DC said, what if depression had a cloak and sarcasm? Raven is the daughter of Trigon, an interdimensional demonic conqueror, as one is, and Arella, a human woman who was spiritually searching and unfortunately found the cosmic equivalent of, well, this guy's a red flag, a little too late. Now, Trigon is not just a bad dad. He's a world ending force of destruction, domination, and corruption. Like if generational trauma got a gym membership and a cult. Rachel is born as part of a prophecy. She's meant to be the bridge, the doorway, the vessel through which Trigon enters and consumes worlds. No pressure. From the very beginning, Raven's life is shaped by one terrifying premise. Your feelings are dangerous, your power is dangerous, your lineage is dangerous, and if you lose control, people are going to get hurt. And that one premise shapes everything about her. She's raised in Azarath, a peaceful, spiritually disciplined, interdimensional realm where emotional control, meditation, and detachment are central values. This is important because Raven's emotional regulation isn't just a personality trait, it's survival training. She learns to center herself, suppress extremes, monitor every internal shift, stay calm, stay contained, stay small enough that the darkness doesn't notice it's being watched. And eventually, when Trigon's threat escalates, Raven leaves Azarath and seeks help from the Teen Titans. Which means this deeply private, emotionally armored, trauma-loaded magical introvert ends up on a team with people whose main hobbies include making jokes, breaking things, shouting their feelings, and having interpersonal drama in common areas. So naturally, that goes great. One of the most psychologically rich things about Raven is she lives in a constant state of hypervigilance. Hypervigilance is discussed in trauma psychology as a state of heightened sensory sensitivity and constantly scanning for threats. It's common in people who have experienced chronic stress, abuse, or unpredictable environments. When your nervous system learns that danger can erupt at any moment, it stops trusting that calm is real. Raven is basically hypervigilance in levitating form. She monitors her emotions, other people's emotions, environmental energy, mystical disturbances, potential threats, and whether her father is going to burst through a dimensional crack and ruin brunch. Because Raven is an empath. She literally feels the emotions of others. In many versions, she can sense emotional states, absorb pain, and be overwhelmed by the psychic residue of other people's suffering. Now, in pop culture, empath often gets turned into either a cute personality quiz result or a way to explain why someone had to leave the party early. But in Raven's case, it's much more psychologically interesting. Her empathy is not just compassion, it's boundary collapse risk. If you are constantly absorbing everyone else's emotional weather, then emotional regulation becomes less about how do I feel and more about which of these feelings are even mine. And that's a real psychological experience for many people with trauma histories, high sensitivity, or caregiving conditioning. Some people grow up being experts at reading a room because reading a room kept them safe. They can detect tension before anyone speaks, anger before it erupts, disappointment before it lands, and rejection before it's confirmed. That can look like intuition. And sometimes it is intuition, but often it's also a nervous system trained to survive. Have you ever mistaken hyperawareness for peace? In other words, have you ever thought you were just very perceptive when really part of you was just constantly scanning because your body didn't believe you were safe? That's Raven. Now, here's where Raven becomes especially compelling. She's famous for being controlled, calm, reserved, monotone, collected. But psychologically, there's a huge difference between emotional regulation and emotional suppression. And Raven lives right on that razor's edge. Emotional suppression is when you push feelings down, avoid expression, disconnect from emotional experience, or inhibit outward responses in a way that often increases internal stress over time. Emotional regulation is when you acknowledge your feelings, tolerate them, understand them, and respond intentionally. One looks calm from the outside. The other may also look calm from the outside, which frankly is quite rude. Psychologist James Gross, one of the major researchers in emotional regulation, has shown that suppression often reduces visible emotional expression, but doesn't necessarily reduce the internal emotional experience. And it can even increase physiological stress and reduce interpersonal connection. In other words, you may look chill, but your nervous system might be setting small fires in the basement. That is very Raven coded because Raven often appears as composed, but underneath that composure is enormous pressure, fear of hurting people, fear of becoming Trigon, fear of being consumed by rage or despair, fear of losing herself, fear that closeness will make her vulnerable, and fear that vulnerability will become catastrophe. So when Raven says little, withdraws, or distances herself, it can read as coldness, but often it's actually just containment. And that distinction many people know intimately. There are people who don't explode, but they implode quietly. They become the easy one, the mature one, the composed one, the one who never causes problems, the one who everyone assumes is fine because they're not visibly falling apart in the cereal aisle. Meanwhile, internally, these people are holding back a tidal wave with a paperclip. Raven's emotional life is a powerful metaphor for what happens when someone becomes deeply identified with the belief of, my feelings are dangerous. What emotion do you most instinctively try to control, mute, or hide? Is it anger, sadness, fear, need, jealousy, grief? And where did you learn that that emotion was too much? Let's talk about one of Raven's most universal themes, the terror of inheritance. Like we mentioned before, Raven is the daughter of Trigon. She carries his power, she's tied to his destiny, and in many stories, he's not just a villain that's out there. He's a force that can act through her. And psychologically, that maps beautifully onto what a lot of people think about family systems. Not because your parent is literally a horned demon from another dimension, though if Christmas was weird, I'm not here to judge, but because many of us carry some version of this fear. What if I become like the person who hurt me? What if their anger is in me? What if their instability is in me? What if the very thing I hate is somehow just part of my wiring? This is a major issue in intergenerational trauma. Intergenerational trauma refers to the patterns of emotional pain, coping styles, beliefs, dysregulation, and survival strategies that get passed through families, not just genetically, but relationally, behaviorally, and culturally. Children don't just inherit eye color, they inherit scripts, fears, thresholds, defenses, attachment templates, and sometimes a suspiciously intense reaction to being perceived. Raven's entire arc asks, if darkness is in your blood, do you belong to it? And the answer her story keeps circling back to is no. Inheritance is influence, not destiny. And that's huge. In trauma work, one of the hardest things people do is separate what they were given and what they choose to become. Raven has Trigon's power, but she does not have to become Trigon's values. That distinction is everything. Is there any trait in yourself that you fear because it reminds you of someone who hurt you? And have you ever paused to ask, is this actually the same trait? Or am I just terrified because it echoes the past? Now, let's get into relationships because Raven is a fascinating study in attachment. Attachment theory was originally developed by John Bowlby and later expanded by Mary Ainsworth and many others since. It helps us understand how early relational experiences shape how we connect, trust, depend, and protect ourselves. Now, I'm not diagnosing a goth wizard, but Raven often exhibits patterns that feel very familiar to people with avoidant or fearful avoidant attachment. She exhibits things like emotional distance, discomfort with vulnerability, reluctance to rely on others, strong self-containment, connection mixed with withdrawal, and a longing for closeness but fearing what closeness might cost. And I mean, can you blame her? If your inner world feels dangerous, intimacy becomes terrifying because intimacy means being seen, being affected, letting people be close enough to witness what you're trying to contain, and risking that if you crack open, what comes out might hurt them. So Raven often does that classic trauma thing where she says, essentially, I care about you deeply. Therefore, for your safety, I will stand over here and emotionally hover at a tasteful distance. Which, by the way, is not a lack of love. Sometimes distance is how frightened people attempt love. One of the beautiful things about the Teen Titans, especially in many adaptations, is that Raven slowly starts to learn that she can be known, she can be accepted, she can be part of a found family, and connection does not automatically equal catastrophe. Characters like Beast Boy are especially useful in her story because he often represents emotional spontaneity, playfulness, persistence, and irreverence, the exact energies Raven both resists and secretly needs. He's chaos. She's containment. He's what if we did a prank? She's what if I astral project out of this conversation? But that contrast matters because healing often doesn't come from finding people exactly like us. It comes from finding safe people who can survive our edges. When you pull away from other people, is it because you don't care or because you care so much that being vulnerable feels dangerous? Here's what makes Raven more than just a cool dark magic character. She isn't powerful because she has no darkness. She's powerful because she does have darkness and still chooses discipline, compassion, and restraint. That's not weakness. That's mastery. And in a culture that often glamorizes either emotional numbness or emotional chaos, Raven gives us a third option. Feel deeply, know your shadow, and learn not to let it drive. So let's talk about that shadow. If there is any character who practically walks on screen and says, "Hello, I'm a Jungian metaphor," it's Raven. Carl Jung's concept of the shadow refers to the parts of ourselves that we reject, repress, disown, or refuse to identify with. And we talked a lot about the shadow in season 1, so you can check out some of those videos if you're interested in learning more about it. A couple of them are linked in the description down below, but finish this one first. The shadow isn't just bad stuff. It's often whatever the conscious self has decided is unacceptable. For Raven, the shadow is made dramatically literal. Demonic inheritance, dangerous power, rage, destruction, possession, dark impulses, and apocalyptic potential. But the deeper symbolism is this. What happens when the parts of you that you fear the most are also the parts of you you must understand in order to be whole? That's Raven's whole thing. And this is where people often get shadow work wrong. Shadow integration is not, I guess I should just unleash all my darkness and call it authenticity. My villain arc is healing. I screamed at everyone because I'm finally honoring my truth. No, that's not shadow integration. That's just poor impulse control with branding. Shadow integration means recognizing what's in you, naming it honestly, understanding where it came from, taking responsibility for how it moves, and choosing a conscious relationship with it. Raven doesn't become stronger by pretending Trigon's influence doesn't exist. She becomes stronger by confronting it, understanding it, refusing to be ruled by it, and making deliberate choices anyway. That's the real shadow work. What part of yourself do you fear so much that you mostly try avoiding knowing it? And what would it look like to relate to that part with honesty instead of panic? That doesn't mean indulging it. It means not being unconsciously ruled by what you refuse to face. Very Raven. Very Mage. Okay, here's where I think Raven is especially important for a lot of high-functioning, emotionally controlled people. She is very good at discipline. She's less consistently good at gentleness. And that matters because many trauma survivors become brilliant at monitoring themselves, correcting themselves, containing themselves, anticipating harm, being useful, being composed, and being good. But they're often terrible at self-compassion. Research by Kristen Neff on self-compassion suggests that healthier emotional resilience is supported not by harsher self-judgment, but by self-kindness instead of self-criticism, common humanity instead of isolation, and mindfulness instead of over-identification. Raven is naturally strong in some forms of mindfulness, observation, awareness, centering, but she often struggles with self-kindness, allowing imperfection, and believing that she's more than her threat potential. And that's huge. Because if your whole self-concept becomes, I must remain in control at all costs, then every emotional wobble can feel like moral failure. You're not just upset, you're failing. You're not just triggered, you're dangerous. You're not just human, you're proof that the darkness is winning. That's a brutal internal world. Self-compassion doesn't mean Raven stops taking responsibility. It means she stops treating her humanity like evidence against her. And that's a lesson that a lot of us need. When you make a mistake or lose emotional balance, do you respond with curiosity or contempt? Do you become your own mentor or your own Trigon? Yeah, I know. That one came for all of us. There's another deeply important psychological theme in Raven, the belief that feeling a dark emotion means becoming a dark person. This is incredibly common. People often fear that if they feel anger, they'll become cruel. If they feel grief, they'll drown. If they feel envy, they're toxic. If they feel desire, then they're selfish. If they feel resentment, then they're bad. Or if they just feel too much, then they'll lose control. But emotions are not our identity. Emotions are just information. This is a cornerstone of many modern therapeutic approaches, including aspects of acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, and emotion-focused work. You are not your thoughts. You are not your urges. You are not every emotion that passes through your body. Raven's story constantly dramatizes this distinction. She can feel rage, despair, fear, darkness, corruption pulling at her and still make choices. That's the key. Not because the feelings aren't real, not because the impulses don't matter, but because awareness creates space. Psychologist Viktor Frankl famously wrote that between stimulus and response, there's space. And in that space is our power to choose. Raven lives in that space. Meditation, mantras, breath, discipline, magical focus, those are all symbolic tools for what many of us need psychologically. A pause between feeling and action. That pause is freedom. What emotion in your life have you treated like a prophecy? Meaning, if I feel this, I am this. And what if it doesn't? What if anger means a boundary matters? What if sadness means something mattered? What if fear means your body remembers? What if intensity means you're alive, not doomed? Okay, we have to talk about the Teen Titans for a second because Raven's healing does not happen in isolation. And this matters because so many emotionally guarded people believe that they should be able to heal alone. And Raven would love that plan. It's elegant, it's efficient, and it's emotionally low maintenance. But it's also not how humans work. One of the things trauma research keeps reinforcing is that safe relationships help regulate the nervous system. And this is often referred to as co-regulation. Before we can fully self-regulate, we learn regulation through being soothed, being understood, being safely mirrored, and being emotionally held without being controlled. The Teen Titans become, in many versions, exactly that. A place where Raven is challenged, seen, irritated, loved, included, and repeatedly reminded that she is more than the role that she was born into. That's found family at its best. Not people who fix you, but people who make it safer to practice being whole. And that is one of the most moving things about Raven. She doesn't heal by becoming less powerful. She heals by becoming less alone. Who in your life helps your nervous system come down? Not by solving your problems, but by making you feel safer to exist. Because that person, you should treasure them. That person might be your Titan. We've reached my favorite part and ultimately the point of this whole podcast, which is taking the story and applying it to real life. So, what does Raven teach us? Actually, there's a lot. She teaches us that you can inherit darkness without belonging to it. Yes, what shaped you is real, who hurt you is real, what runs in the family is real, and yet you are not sentenced to repeat it. She teaches us that control is not the same as healing. Being composed is not the same as being free. Looking calm is not the same thing as feeling safe. And sometimes the strongest people are just the most practiced at hiding them. She teaches us that your shadow needs relationships, not denial. The parts of you that scare you are often the parts that need the most conscious attention, not repression, not indulgence, but integration. She also teaches us that feeling something dark does not make you dark. A feeling is not fate. An impulse is not an identity. Awareness plus choice is where your power lives. Raven's story also teaches us that healing requires other people. Not everyone deserves access to your inner world, but no one becomes whole by never being known. And maybe her most important lesson for us is you are not what you were made for. You are what you choose to be. Raven was meant to be a doorway for destruction. Instead, over and over again, she chooses protection, restraint, compassion, courage, and connection. That is what makes her heroic. Not the powers, not the cloak, not the goth aesthetic, which, to be fair, is immaculate. The heroism is that she keeps choosing herself over the script she inherited. I want to leave you with a few questions today before we close. What part of yourself have you been treating like a threat when it might actually be a wounded source of power? Where in your life are you managing appearances of control instead of building actual safety? And if you truly believed that your inheritance was not your destiny, what would you finally allow yourself to become? Take those with you. Journal them, talk them out, stare into the middle distance as your tea goes cold, whatever works for you. And if this episode resonated with you, if Raven has ever made you feel seen, if you've ever been the calm one who was secretly carrying the entire universe inside your chest, then I'd love to hear from you. Drop me a comment and tell me which Raven lesson hit hardest for you today. Was it the fear of becoming who hurt you, the difference between suppression and regulation, the shadow work, the found family, or was it the I look fine, but internally I am 3 raccoons in a trench coat holding back an apocalypse energy? And if you know someone who needs this episode, someone who is strong, sensitive, and maybe a little too practiced at holding it together, send it to them. If you enjoyed today's dive, don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, leave a comment, all the algorithmic rituals required by the digital gods. Because here at the Grounded Mage, we believe that your fandom can be your mirror. Your myths can be medicine, and your inner darkness might not be your enemy. It might just be asking to be understood. Next week, we go back to Hogwarts to talk about the one and only boy who lived, Harry Potter. Until next week, fellow mages, make it make magic.